When it comes to doing actual serious work as an engineer, there's much less vibe in it. So I like to call it AI coding. I don't like to associate myself with vibe coders. So the difference that I see, honestly, between vibe coding and what I call AI coding is vibe coding, you basically just explain what you want. You let it run for like 16, 20 minutes. It will poop out something. You're going to look at it and you're going to say, okay, I want this changed. I want this changed. I want this changed. It'll run again for 5 minutes. It'll pop something out, and over and over and over that will happen. Like I said, it's cool for a passion project, but when it comes to like building a production system, what I do with AI coding is I actually sit down and I write out plans.
We've heard about Claude Code, which I will not use. We've heard about Codex, which you tried to make me use. What is really vibe coding at the end of the day? Especially like what is vibe coding to someone who's actually technical? Because for me, vibe coding is just like, hey, like vibes. I just type letters on the keyboard and something comes out. Cool. That kind of seems kind of cool. But to you, like, what was actually your first impression of vibe coding originally? Um, and because I remember you didn't actually want to use, or not that you didn't want to use, or I guess you were skeptical of using like cursor, etc. Back in the day. But well, like, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, so I think I'll take it from like the start, sort of. I was very skeptical of using cursor. So this was back in like 2024, end of 2024. We were working on, I think it was the Prey Screen backend, or it was one of the backends we were working on. I was coding in Java a lot, and we needed some help to kind of just get another contractor in to help us kind of speed things up. And every Java developer that we found was slow. They were like 40 years old, enterprise. They wanted like a BRD document. They wanted a month to do things that like would take me 2 days. I just didn't have the 2 days to do it, right? So that was the first time where I was like, okay, fuck it. I have to just see what I can do. So I actually used to use Claude projects on the web and code entire like backends using that. I would never do that again, but I did it. And then it was around like Christmas break that I hopped on Cursor. And ever since then, I started dipping my toes more and more into AI coding. And now, what and I haven't really like said it, but I'm sure a lot of other people are in the same boat. I don't really code anymore. Like I don't really write code, which is very strange because like I mean I've been coding for 20 years. So this is obviously a massive difference than how I've been working for 20 years, right? So that's kind of like insight on the background. And I think vibe coding is an interesting word. Vibe coding has two meanings in my head. So there's a lot of people that legitimately vibe code, like you said, where it's like you kind of just type something and you're vibing, and that's it. Yeah, that's not great, honestly. I mean, if you want to put together an app really quick as like an MVP or a demo, you can do that. But I think it's pretty dangerous to ship that to production, and I'm like we can touch on that a lot more. But like uh, yeah, you have to be extremely careful. These vibe coding platforms and AI is not infallible. Like they make mistakes, they make very serious mistakes. And there's a lot of security flaws that can come up that unless you're specifically asking for them, it will never be able to like patch them. So I think vibe coding as like a passion project, just making a fun little app is really cool. But when it comes to doing actual serious work as an engineer, there's much less vibe in it. So I like to call it AI coding. I don't like to associate myself with vibe coders. um, I think it's dramatically different. So the difference that I see, honestly, between vibe coding and what I call AI coding is vibe coding, you basically just explain what you want. You let it run for like 16, 20 minutes. It will poop out something. You're going to look at it and you're going to say, okay, I want this changed. I want this changed. I want this changed. It'll run again for 5 minutes. It'll pop something out, and over and over and over that will happen. That's what, like I said, it's cool for a passion project, but when it comes to like building a production system, what I do with AI coding is I actually sit down and I write out plans for every feature I've done. I will sit down with like literally a pen and paper. I will write out what kind of architecture I want, how I see the feature panning out in terms of like where is it fitting inside of our services, inside of our models, our database? Do I need to create new tables? Do I need feature flags? Do I need like environmental variables? All this stuff. I will go through all of this on paper. I will then take all that from paper and talk to like Codex. I use Codex primarily. I will talk to Codex like 5.2 extra high, like the smartest model, and we will just draft out massive markdown documents that basically break everything down into phases. Each phase is like one small component of this master plan of basically implementing this feature end to end. And then within each phase, there's steps broken down into checklists. So it ends up being like a massive markdown file, but that markdown file becomes like the source of truth for every agent that I run on top of it. So it always knows the state that the last one left the project in, where to pick it up from, and what they have to do next. It also gives them the opportunity to like pre-plan. So it's like I'm writing this SQL statement right now to add like a table to our database. I know that I have to write a bunch more, so let me just put that in in this one migration file instead of breaking it up into sticks or whatever. If you were doing it like one by one.
And I was
Sorry,
gonna
go
say,
ahead.
and in terms of like, you would, I think this is maybe one of the points, but you said around basically giving it context on the previous run. So I guess that my question is kind of like, what places does vibe coding break, or can it break? I remember once you told me that it deleted like our database or just or something. But sometimes it just lies and says, "Oh yeah, I've done it, cool," and it's done nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, it does that a lot too. And that's why I'm very skeptical of like vibe coding as a whole. But like, yeah, I ran Grok once in Cursor and it signed into our like development database and just truncated all the tables because it was broken, deleted everything. And that was like as Latana was given a demo to someone, which is like, bro, come on, man. Like the worst timing. But it was funny, you know what I mean? But it definitely does that. It will lie to you. So like I always have to keep a very watchful eye on it. And that's where like the vibe, you start losing the vibe at that point where you're like, you're more of a police officer. You're like, bro, what the fuck? Why didn't you do this?
That's actually hilarious, man. You said there's AI coding and then there's vibe coding. Like, would you say anyone now who is doing proper engineering is silly for doing proper engineering?
I guess there's two ways you could look at it, right? Like there's many ways you could look at it, really. I think there's some things that right now, like AI is just not good at because there's just not enough data out there to work on these projects. So things that come to mind is like C, C++, Verilog, if we're getting like super low level firmware kind of engineering. I don't think you can have AI help you that much. It's just it doesn't have enough data to understand how to code properly in that language. But if you're writing something like JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever, like Python, these languages that are very, very common, there's lots of stuff on the internet for it. I don't necessarily think you're silly for not using AI, but I think you're definitely falling behind. And by the end of this year, you'll probably be very silly not to be picking this up in some regard. There's always still things that like you need a human to go in and do. Like most of these AI models are really shit at like design, for an example. So you're gonna always have to have a human kind of there looking at stuff. I say always very loosely, just in this time right now. In general, like any like big backend stuff, you should probably be using AI. Like unless there's proprietary code that you can't send to ChatGPT, which like honestly, if you're a startup founder, you probably don't have that. Like unless you're like a lab or something that's doing like cutting edge AI research.
Yeah, like putting a hotel on the moon. But anyways, let's let's move on. When you are, I guess, putting production code out there, which some of it is kind of like AI written, are they any kind of like, as if say a top three checklist that you go through before putting it from developer or not from staging to like production?
The three main things that I focus on with our code is one, I have a bunch of like unit and integration tests that I wrote with AI because AI is very good with that, but I was watching it like a hawk. Like I think I took like 6 days to write all the tests. And all
So,
those tests are
so
around
what is a unit test?
yeah, that's a good point. A unit test is basically every like you have functions in your code, you have things that it does. these unit tests will just test to make sure that each one of those functions operates as it should. So it will test scenarios where it should work, it will test scenarios where it should break, and it will check to make sure against like a list of known and good answers whether or not it's working properly.
Okay,
So we
if they give like an example of like a unit test, for
yeah,
example.
so we can have a unit test, right? So let's say you have a function x plus y is basically the function, right? You do x plus y equals z. Z is the return. So Z is what you will see. So if I put in 2 as X and 3 as Y, I'll have 2 plus 3
Mhm,
equals, and then the function should return 5.
mhm,
So a unit test you would do is you would put 2 and 3 as X and Y, and
mhm,
then you would assert, so you would say, I'm expecting the
mhm,
answer of this function to be 5.
mhm,
So as long as it did that, it would be good, right? But if you put 2 and 3 and then the answer came out 8,
mhm.
it would say, okay, there was an issue here,
Okay, cool.
right?
And if we're gonna put that into like a real world example, let's say like in an app, like if you're gonna do unit tests on a sign up page or sign in page, what would that screen? What would that look like?
Yeah, so I probably one of the most basic ones is like if you have an email login, right? You type in an email. What does it look like when you type in an email address? Does it successfully go to ask you to type in a password after? Or if you type in something that is not an email, does it also go to the thing type in a password? Because obviously that's wrong. It's
Mhm,
supposed to stop, right? It's supposed to say, hey, this is not an email.
mm,
So you'll do a lot of those, and then you'll type in like things that look like emails, but they're broken. And then that's like a test of whether or not your email checking is working or not, or something like that, right? So there's like a large variety, and it's a crazy metric, but like a lot of code bases will be like 100,000 lines of code or something. And then the unit test will be 10 million lines because they
wow.
will just test for everything possible. So they do that for a lot of like production databases and stuff that's
So
used, right?
so for example, if like when you sign up to something, it's asking you for your password and for your password to be strong, like it needs to have a number, it needs to all those kind of things. It says are those and whenever you don't hit those things and it kind of doesn't let you go through, is that a unit test being run there or?
Not quite. So those would be like live kind of filters, right?
Oh,
Like
okay, yeah,
we're not going to let this account be created if the password's not strong enough.
yeah, yeah.
Unit tests would be like they're only run in pipelines when you're moving from development to production.
Ah, okay, 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 cool.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Okay, but anyway, sorry, I took you out on a little.
Yeah, no, that's all good.
But yeah, yeah, from development to production. So one of
Yeah.
them, I guess you mentioned, is kind of like the unit tests type of thing, and any other two?
Yeah, so unit tests are a big one. Then I do a lot of manual QA. So like if I coded something using AI, at every phase I'm testing what it did. And at the end of every phase in my plan, I have exit criteria. So like if this phase was successful, then this should be possible. And I will manually test that. I'd make sure I'm always doing that manual QA. I'm doing the unit tests. And then the last piece, which is really the most important, and this is where kind of like it helps to have an actual engineering background where you have done this for so many years, is there's a set number of like cybersecurity uh like fundamental just best practices that you should implement. And it's just about understanding that intuitively and knowing like, okay, if there's an input that is connected to a database, I have to make sure that I can't inject SQL into it. That's super important. So there's like some elements there that is just kind of intuitive, but you always check that. That's like I think the third and probably most important, honestly.
So James, if someone is vibe coding, what advice would you give them in terms of what are the key things they should look out for? Because vibe coding, I've heard in the streets that it can be dangerous.
Some big things are like just always make sure your infra is taken care of. Like one of the biggest scandals I think of like nearing the end of last year was I don't remember the specifics, but there was an app that blew up that had a bunch of people's like private information on it. And then it turns out that they were hosting all that information on like a public uh, bucket. Bucket is like a server that you could just
I think it
upload
was a
stuff
T
to.
app.
Yes, it was a Tia. You're right. Yeah, yeah, it was like a gossip app, and they had all the IDs like government IDs on this server that you could just go to in your browser and just look. So obviously, like just making sure you have your infra locked down is super important, and like you can't rely on AWS doesn't do that for you. You have to know how to do that. You can ask ChatGPT. You just have to make sure you ask, right? Like it's not gonna do it for you just off the jump. So you have to know that. Obviously, just knowing your like cybersecurity principles and just having this like OWASP. OWASP is like this just set fundamental list of like cybersecurity principles. Super basic. They're really easy to make sure that you have. And honestly, AI models are pretty good at implementing it, but you just have to know that they exist so that you can ask and you can check and you can verify the entire time. And then I think the other thing, which I like we taught our developer how to use AI, right? And that was a big moment for me because he didn't really like it, and we kind of showed it to him, and he's like getting accustomed to using it. And like the biggest point that I told him was, don't trust it. Like this thing is not perfect and it will lie to you, as we've alluded to before. It will like try to sneak around and just say that it did what it did. And that could be something that is going to expose your app to something terrible. You know what I mean? So just be extremely critical of everything, especially if you're releasing it publicly. Just everything, have a super sharp eye and just look through everything. That's the most important, I think.
Nah, cool. I appreciate it. So everyone should stay safe while vibe coding.
So obviously, as a technical person equipped with AI, the development speed that we had for grade has like significantly improved. We have linear, we have a bunch of tickets in linear, and we blast through those tickets significantly faster than if I was manually writing this, like I was just a few years ago, right? And that really makes me excited, I think, for the future, where it's like there's so much potential here for developers to speed up the work that they're doing, the output that they're able to contribute to a project, to their work, to something that they're doing, right? I think that's really exciting. I think it really ties into like our mission with Grade, right? Where it's like we want to be able to reward the people that are willing to work really hard and have like this dramatic output. And the way I see it, like if you are an extremely talented engineer that maybe had some classical engineering training where it was like you weren't using AI when you were learning how to do it, but now you're equipped with AI, you have all of that knowledge of like how to build really good, really resilient, really strong systems. And now you've multiplied your speed by 1,000 times or something, right? That is like super appealing. And that's kind of like the vision that I have with like developers in grade where it's like all of a sudden now you can come into a code base and you can say, I'm going to blast off and I'm going to hit like 40 tickets. I'm going to get them done in the next 2 days.
Mhm,
And if I did that and then you're sitting there and you did like 2 tickets, I should probably be paid more,
mhm.
right? Like that just makes sense. And I think that's really exciting with grade. And I think it like so perfectly fits into this time that we're living in where like AI is clashing with like the current workforce, and you have a bunch of like super hungry, ambitious people that just want to make money, right? They just want to be successful and they want to just do things for other people. So I think it's incredibly exciting.